Hello again, and welcome back to week 30 of year 3 of the Religious Education Initiative. This is day 3. We're continuing through the Gospel of Matthew, and we are arriving at Gethsemane. So last time, we saw Jesus and the disciples go to celebrate the Passover after Judas Iscariot decided to betray him. At the Passover meal, Jesus instituted the Eucharist, breaking the bread and blessing the wine, and giving them to the disciples as his own body and blood. He then predicted to them that they would all betray him, even Peter, who insisted that he would never do so and would die first. Jesus told him that very night, before the rooster crowed twice, Peter would deny him 3 times. In this week's reading, we will see Jesus lead his disciples out to Gethsemane, where what he foretold will happen, just as he said. So then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. This is verse 36. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and agitated. Then he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So could you not stay awake with me 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again he went away for the 2nd time and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him." At once he came up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you are here to do." Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. Suddenly one of those with Jesus put his hand on his sword, drew it, and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled, which say it must happen in this way?" At that hour Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all this has taken place, so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, in whose house the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus, so that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last 2 came forward and said, "This fellow said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days.'" The high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But Jesus was silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and struck him. And some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?" Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came to him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before all of them, saying, "I do not know what you are talking about." When he went out to the porch, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you are also one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know the man." At that moment the cock crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Now, there's a lot that we could say about this, but last time we emphasized how Jesus is clearly how St. Matthew shows us Jesus clearly in command of the situation. He is actively prophesying and foretelling every step of his passion before it happens. We don't see that same thing here in this passage. What we see instead is Jesus weeping, Jesus grieved even to death, Jesus praying that this cup might pass from him. And we could be deeply confused by either of these things by themselves, right? Jesus clearly, absolutely in command of the situation, not even bothered, not even grieved, is a little cold, is a little distant, is a little unrealistic. We can think, okay, maybe he's not really incarnate if he's facing a violent death, facing betrayal, facing abandonment, facing humiliation with, such equanimity. That makes sense for God, but, a human would surely, recoil a little bit from death. And then if we only saw Jesus in the garden praying that the cup might pass from him, we might say, well, he's not God at all. He's terrified. He's afraid. He's asking to be let off the hook. He's asking to be spared. He has this grand destiny that he knows he's supposed to fulfill, but he doesn't want it. So maybe he's not maybe he's not divine at all. He's just some human being that God picked on. Both of these heresies have been put forward in the life of the church. It's important that St. Matthew gives us both right next to each other, because what this upholds is exactly what the church has always maintained, that Jesus Christ is fully God and fully human. He is the second person of the Trinity. He is infinite and eternal and perfect and omniscient and omnipotent. No one forces him to go anywhere, and he is here on purpose, by choice, doing what he does for our salvation. But he is fully human as well, and he recoils in the face of death. He avoids pain, and he expresses this in the only way that a human being can rightly express this, in prayer, asking God, asking the Father to remove this from him if it is possible, and then also saying, "But not my will, yours be done." He, at the same time, exhibits to us the fullness of his humanity. He recoils and seeks to flee, seeks to avoid suffering and death, as does every human, and at the same time, he remains perfectly obedient, perfectly submitted to the will of the Father. And in this case, it is not just the will of the Father, it is his own divine will. The human will is submitted to and harmonized, reconciled, brought together in one with the divine will. It doesn't cease to exist. It is not drowned in the divine will, as some other heretics in the history of the church have said, but it is reconciled. It is in harmony with the divine will. So, this is what the Lord is doing. He is showing us his humanity, not just to show us this is real. It's not just play acting, but in showing us this and making sure his disciples see this, he makes very clear to us how we are to face suffering. It's a difficult road, but it's not impossible. We ask to be delivered, and we submit ourselves to God's will. So, we are coming up very quickly on the final days of Great Lent, on Pascha, and on the Lord's death and resurrection. May the Lord sustain all of us. God bless you. We'll see you next week.